Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin Gosztola, managing editor for Shadowproof, and it's December 17th, 2020, and this is the Dissenter Weekly. Thanks for joining for updates on whistleblower stories from the past week, as well as updates on Julian Assange's case. We've been doing this show all throughout 2020, and this is the last broadcast of the year. And unfortunately, my colleague Brian Sonnenstein is dealing with a snowstorm in Maine, and so he won't be able to join for this broadcast. I'll be doing this, but I've been streaming all week. Some of you have tuned in and listened to my coverage as I dig into all the talk about pardons for people like Edward Snowden, NSA whistleblower, Reality Winner, NSA whistleblower, and WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, and whether Donald Trump will offer pardons to any of these people who have been unjustly prosecuted under the Espionage Act. There's a lot of discussion in at least the House of Representatives. We've seen Congress people on both sides, few Democrats, number of Republicans stand up for Edward Snowden, even speak up for Assange and Reality Winner. Justin Amash has called for a pardon for both Assange and Reality Winner, and he's a libertarian who left the Republican Party during Trump's presidency. So we have a show for you today with some stories to round out the year. And then as I close out this broadcast, I'll do a little bit of a reflection on where we're at with the war on whistleblowers that we know has been around and present in the U.S. and throughout the world for at least the last 10 to 15 years. We've been grappling with the impacts of this on people who are willing to show courage and reveal war crimes and torture and corruption within government institutions, and then also the attacks on journalists who publish these whistleblowers' revelations, the materials, the source materials that are provided. So first, just let me welcome the lovely people to this broadcast who do tune in and join me. And some of you have been here almost every day this past week. So you're amazing, and thank you for being around to follow my coverage of these important issues. Let's start with something that has happened with the Justice Department. That is that Trump has appointed or named a new acting attorney general, and that person is Jeffrey A. Rosen, who is now going to run the Justice Department for the remainder of the Trump presidency, which of course is around a month now, or a little more than a month, not very long, but will preside over any business that goes on. And this will affect pardons. This guy will be there. So if we carry through the logic, I had been talking about Bill Barr leaving the Justice Department and saying this is an opening. This is something that's we're not going to have Bill Barr there anymore. Bill Barr is on the record as being vehemently opposed to Edward Snowden receiving a pardon, and also perhaps the animosity he may harbor towards Julian Assange that might not be present anymore. So it's potentially a possibility that Julian Assange could receive a pardon. However, in doing some digging, I was unable to find any record of Jeffrey A. Rosen reacting to the indictment of Assange or being on the record about Assange and whether he believes that Assange and WikiLeaks are engaged in criminal activity. Although that is the official position of the U.S. government, I couldn't find anything that he has said. But what I did find is in relation to Snowden, and this is unfortunate, perhaps for people who believe there was some momentum in the direction of getting Snowden back home, getting him some kind of clemency. It would appear, or it's evident, that Jeffrey A. Rosen, as Deputy Attorney General, was involved in speaking out or promoting the judgment and the permanent injunction against Snowden over the publication of his book, Permanent Record, which I believe is a bestseller. This memoir describing why he did what he did, and it has garnered him a lot of positive attention in the last year and a half. And so the lawsuit was that the profits from his book should not go to Snowden, and they in fact should go to the United States government because he did not put his book through publication review, and they did not have an opportunity to redact or request the removal of information. This is something that all intelligence agency employees are expected to go through, and then they can have their books censored if they don't. And if they, and also in the worst case scenario, as is what's happening here, you can have all the money that you make confiscated. It can go to the government. And so the ruling was that, and this was a federal court determining that the government is to receive $5.2 million or more, and that there's a trust which will be receiving further money, royalties, and or any financial advantages derived by Snowden from Permanent Record. And they're also supposed to get money from 56 specific speeches that he has given about his whistleblowing and the materials that he revealed to all of us. And so what did Rosen have to say about this, and how did he defend it? Quote, Edward Snowden violated his legal obligations to the United States, and therefore his unlawful financial gains must be relinquished to the government. As this case demonstrates, the Department of Justice will not overlook the wrongful actions of those who seek to betray the trust reposed in them and to personally profit from their access to classified national security information. And so they accuse him of profiteering off of the information. They accuse him, as the author of this memoir, of publishing this to enrich himself. And they go after the financial gains that he's been able to get from this book. And Rosen particularly is trying to continue the policy of the Justice Department. Through this lawsuit, he's continuing the policy of this war on whistleblowers, of pursuing these unjust Espionage Act prosecutions. And so that's not very good for the potential that Edward Snowden could receive a pardon. Maybe some way or another Trump can overrule that standard, but if Rosen's able to object, yes, yeah. And let me make this point, because someone tuned into the broadcast is making it as well. The idea that you can't publish a book about your whistleblowing and about the material that was secret without being accused of profiting and enriching yourself by selling classified information to the public. Meanwhile, we have people who are part of this revolving door that go in and out of intelligence agencies and are profiting off of their own positions, their own stature as elites. What is John Brennan doing? What is James Clapper doing? What does General David Petraeus do? What do all these figures do if not go in and out of these agencies and then give speeches where they're paid to share their experiences? John Brennan's going on MSNBC. You have people like Leon Panetta doing this as well. Former CIA officials, former Pentagon officials, all of them. And then some of them go to military contractors. Some of them go to cybersecurity contractors. this is how it works. It's just wrong when they want to use this information in ways that could potentially dismantle and constrict the military industrial complex or the national security state. So that's primarily why Edward Snowden is not a hero. The way that he wants to use his knowledge from the government is not in line with what the top brass of these agencies want and desire. And so that's that story. The next thing I want to cover here is an update on Rebecca Jones, who is the COVID-19 data whistleblower that had her home raided in Florida. We covered this on the broadcast in the past week, and she has now written a column for the Miami Herald that is directed at would-be whistleblowers in order to try and tamp down the effect or the impact of it, because as you can imagine, the way this all unfolded and the images that were broadcast can be hugely frightening to anyone within government agencies that are challenging the way in which data around the pandemic is being doctored or fudged just to make it seem like things aren't as bad as they really are. We know that the death toll right now in the United States is somewhere around 3,000 plus deaths per day at the moment. Has been really high for the last couple of weeks, somewhere in the 2,000s for an extended amount of time. And so Rebecca Jones was pushing out data about what was really going on based on her knowledge of Florida health departments and at county levels, tracking it, trying to impress upon people that Governor Ron DeSantis was allowing this uncontrolled spread in the state, not representing what was going on correctly. And she became a threat to them. She became someone who had to be disrupted, and they targeted her in this raid. And she writes about what happened in this article that was published at the Miami Herald. This is an opinion editorial that she wrote for this major newspaper. And as she begins, she says, "The whiplash my family and I experienced after the raid last week felt like deja vu of what I went through in May, with a violent Gestapo-like twist." She was fired from the health department in Florida and accused of something that she didn't do. And this came after she discussed filing a whistleblower complaint regarding the administrator's data secrecy and manipulation. So eventually she was thrust into the spotlight. She's developed a following for what she does, and people have looked to her. And so the thing that she was accused of doing, what she was accused of doing was sending a message over a publicly accessible email account to Florida Department of Health employees, urging them to come forward and speak up about what was happening in the state. That's the crime. That's what they say was unauthorized access to a computer. And the Electronic Frontier Foundation breaks it down even more into specific detail. Cindy Cohn over at EFF.org has a good breakdown of how the raid on Rebecca Jones showed the need to reform overbroad computer crime laws and the risks of over-reliance on IP addresses. So for the technical people out there who want to know essentially what they're claiming was unauthorized about this, it actually, the definition of unauthorized is subject to a whole lot of interpretation. And essentially what can be gleaned from the warrant for the home raid is that it was a response to a text message sent to a group of governmental and non-governmental people working on tracking COVID, urging members to speak up about government hiding and manipulating information about the COVID outbreak in Florida. And so the affidavit lays out, according to EFF, that the text group shared a single username and password, and some have even said that the credentials were publicly available. And then they add, either way, it's hard to see how the text could have been unauthorized. There was no technical or other notice to Ms. Jones that sending a message to the list was not allowed. Yet this wafer-thin read was accepted by a court as a basis for a search warrant of Ms. Jones's family home. And so she had her home raided simply because she was encouraging other whistleblowers, or somebody was encouraging other whistleblowers. I don't think she even says that this is a message that she sent. It just somehow got traced back to her, which is something I'm sure she's continuing to challenge. And they don't like that she was encouraging other whistleblowers, but more than anything, they knew that she was in contact with people in these departments and they could compromise her sources and intimidate them. So the message that Rebecca Jones has for those people out there who are being told to beware of what the Florida government will do if they are too outspoken, her message to them is, and this is the quote, this is how she ends her column. I think this is a really strong message. Attacking scientists and whistleblowers is as American as apple pie. Any arguments to the contrary are naive and contrite. But people's refusal to be silenced is equally American to all the would-be whistleblowers considering coming forward, but who might be scared by the raid on my home. Never let the fear of retaliation temper your desire to be a good, honest person. I will continue to speak truth to power to provide critical information on coronavirus and environmental issues, and never allow man so devoid of empathy and humanity to silence my voice. The stories of what happened inside the state during this pandemic will become more widely known over time. People who have been fired or quit will step forward. The revelations about the state's obstruction during this response will change our democracy forever. Until then, I will be here focusing on the data. And that's how she wraps up a good column on what she's been through and why people have to stand up to these kinds of Gestapo-like raids that are being conducted against people who challenge the way the health departments are reporting what is ongoing in a state, probably purely for the purpose to keep businesses open and to subject workers to further duress and suffering, as they've been through a lot of stress this year. And if you were an essential worker, you didn't have any break. If you got to work from home, you had some break, but that doesn't necessarily mean you weren't overworked. But you didn't have to go through the kinds of risks that other people, as they called it, the front lines were, and places were reopened that probably shouldn't have been reopened. And so she's letting people know exactly what is the state of play in Florida as far as freedom goes, as far as what people and governments can do and say about Ron DeSantis without fear of having this deputized police force show up at their door just because they sent a message. So let's move on, because I think a good way to get into the next story is to say that what Rebecca Jones finds herself going through is she's slowly being transformed, slowly experiencing a shift in the treatment. She was Rebecca Jones in the eyes of the Florida government. And as they target her they're treating her more and more like she's Julian Assange. And so let's talk about what we have in the last couple of days here. We have new audio that has been released of a call with Julian Assange to the State Department, where he talks to a State Department attorney and warns the State Department that an associate has gone rogue. Daniel Domscheit-Berg is going to potentially release material, and WikiLeaks doesn't think they can stop them, but maybe the State Department could do something about stopping the release. They could seek an injunction in Germany in order to stop the publication of material. There's issues around a stolen server, which Der Spiegel had reported. Guardian editor, former editor David Lee, journalist Luke Harding are implicated, of course, in this fiasco, in all of this drama that put lives at risk. And we have evidence that there's a call that Assange, accompanied by Sarah Harrison, makes in order to try and limit the damage. And this undercuts a narrative that's been crucial to delegitimizing WikiLeaks, that the organization has blood on its hands. And all along, as you've been following this extradition case, many of you will be aware that we've come to learn information about the extent to which they did go to the trouble of redacting these documents in order to protect people. And so I'd like to play this clip. I'd like to play part of this clip so we can hear Julian Assange's voice, something that I think people will appreciate, being able to hear his voice as he remains locked away in Her Majesty's Belmarsh prison. And again, freezing cold conditions, having to demand that the administration gives him clothing so that he can be warm in the winter and not freeze, hopefully not freeze to death before he finally finds out if he's going to be extradited or not to the United States on January 4th. And so we have this audio here that is the definition of exonerating material. And by the way, as you listen, keep in mind that the judge has a transcript of this 75-minute call, knows the contents of the conversation. It's part of the legal team's case in Julian Assange's defense. And, the State Department was well aware that WikiLeaks was making an effort not to cause harm to people. So let me pull this up here. I have to go to the tab. I have to share the audio. And here it is, all queued up. This comes from Project Veritas, which doesn't have a good reputation in the United States. It's a right-wing outfit known to publish dubious material. But in this instance, there's no question about the veracity of this file. This is Julian Assange, and Julian Assange is talking to an attorney at the State Department. So here we go.
Hello, Mr. Assange.
Yes.
This is Chad Palmieri from the Operations Center. I'm going to bring Mr. Johnson to the line now, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Introducing Mr. Cliff Johnson to the call. Mr. Assange, hello, Cliff Johnson.
G'day, Cliff. Thank you for calling back. Have you been briefed?
I believe so. We had understood that you and perhaps Sarah had been trying to reach out both to the department and that there had been some calls into MB London, and I've been asked to get back to you with respect to those calls.
Yes, so the situation is that we have intelligence that the State Department database archive of 250,000 diplomatic cables, including declassified cables, is being spread around, and is to the degree that we believe that within the next few days it will become public, and we're not sure what the timing could be, imminently or within the next few days to a week. And there may be some possibility to stop it.
And who would be releasing these cables? Is this WikiLeaks?
No, we would not be releasing them. We are doing our usual thing of continuing on with our redaction plan. But we have in the past 24 hours released some 100,000 unclassified cables as an attempt to head off the incentives for others to release the entire archive. But I believe that nonetheless, although we may have delayed things a little by doing that, they will do so unless attempts are made to stop them. We have already engaged in some legal attempts to get them to stop, but I think that it will not be enough.
Mr. Assange, who is this other? Who are these other people?
Well, this is Daniel Dumscheit-Berg, a previous employee that we suspended last August.
And so he apparently has access to the material that WikiLeaks also has?
Yes, that's correct.
And he has access to everything that you have, is that right? That's correct. Okay, and that includes classified as well as the unclassified cables?
That's correct.
So your organization, the recent release of the 100,000 or so cables that I think were unclassified, that was something that you guys had done. But what you're indicating now is that a broader group of classified ones might be released by this other entity.
Yes, it was. I mean, in part, we have had a program to go through the cables and release them as we can and as the journalism is done. But so part of that is a natural progression in our release schedule. But we have moved forward the unclassified release schedule very significantly in order to deal with this situation where there's a high demand for the cables, and there is an individual who is spreading them around, and the particular manner in which they're being spread means that sort of a greatly increased number of people are receiving access to them, and we believe that it's only moments to days until the information is made public, which would permit everyone to have access to them. And there are some key details. There are sort of two key pieces of information which, if combined together, are enough to give people, anyone, access to the material. So an encryption key and another piece of information. And this is what has been spread around. And that is why the situation is so delicate because it is extremely easy to spread that information. And we have already received it back from at least two relatively minor newspapers, one in Germany and one in Denmark.
Does anybody else besides this group?
All right, so that's I think that gives you a good sense of that call and what was being communicated. There's much more to the audio, and as is being discussed by people following the broadcast, there were a number of there was the film Risk by Laura Poitras that featured Sarah Harrison and Julian Assange making a call to the State Department. There are details that are known. This raw audio had to be available. I'm not sure who the source is and what led to Project Veritas getting it and publishing it. And then, so the important thing to know about the timeline here of what's happening, and then I'll move on, is that the events he is describing, that Julian Assange is talking about with Freitag, is that the newspaper is making the connection that this decryption key is in the book inside WikiLeaks that has been published, that the file has been located that contains the 250,000 plus cables without any redactions in them, and that it's only a matter of time before they're loose and it's cracked and people are going to be able to read those cables and people will be at risk. And as was made clear by the defense in his case, that something needed to be done. Action needed to be taken by Hillary Clinton's State Department. And so this is in the closing argument. I'd like to read some more while we're on this. I think since this is getting attention, this file, it's worth inserting some more background here. This comes from the call, and he mentions that we released cables slowly to media partners and went through every cable and redacted source identities accordingly. This is Assange. Assange is telling Johnson. Journalists and human rights activists reading cables, redacting them, and putting them out through us, which is what has been happening. It goes on. We have written legal demands through our German lawyers to not publicly reveal the key information that would permit them to spread. What we want the State Department to do is to step up its warning procedures, which was engaged in earlier in this year, like last year, to State Department sources mentioned in the cables, in case there are any individuals who haven't been warned, that they should be warned. Insofar as the State Department can impress upon people with Germany to encourage them to desist that behavior, that would be helpful. So, maybe to even take legal action against them in order to stop this, that would be helpful. So let me close this window here, and we'll move on with the rest of the broadcast here, concluding. I have a few things to say. First, to express my gratitude for all of you who have followed the broadcast this year, this little show. Of course, people who have been watching me experiment throughout this week, as I did some of the streaming in the evening on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, because it's not something I normally do. I don't normally stream every day, but I've been thinking about making that a part of what I do and what we do at Shadowproof. And eventually, maybe there will be guests who join us for the broadcasts. It just all depends on what we're able to organize. But, now I want to first encourage you, if you haven't, to see the video that's posted in the YouTube channel, Shadowproof, Stefania Marizzi. Stefania is a journalist in Italy, and I spoke to her about the testimony that she provided in the Spanish case that is in the court right now, being heard by a judge because of the violations that were alleged by Julian Assange that were committed against him in the spying operation conducted by UC Global in service to the US government and its political prosecution. And she describes how not only does she know, because she was a witness as a visitor to the embassy, that this was ongoing, that there was targeting against Julian Assange, but she was a victim herself. She was one of the journalists who had her rights violated by the actions of UC Global. And she has a campaign, a kind of a fundraiser that is ongoing. If you're able to chip in a couple of dollars, maybe. I know that there's people asking for money these days, but Stefania, and more so than myself, is in need at the moment because she is funding a Freedom of Information Act project to uncover documents on the legal maneuverings of the British government to keep Julian Assange in legal limbo. And also she's trying to get files on of WikiLeaks, Christian Harrison and Joseph Farrell and Sarah Harrison and others. She asked for documents. Some of these people are unindicted co-conspirators in the latest indictment. At least Sarah Harrison is named. Well, she's in the indictment, but not named. And she's seeking information on what the government has been doing to bring them into the war on WikiLeaks by the US government. So it's worth supporting her. She's one of the only people around the world, you can make that journalists, but you don't have to be a journalist to do Freedom of Information Act requests. But she's seeking this information, and astoundingly, the British government is saying that she may not have access to it because she is not from the United Kingdom. And so that is a fight she has legally been waging. She has a court case trying to overcome the obstruction of the government, and it takes money, and she has legal fees to pay. And so she asks for people, particularly today, she's been doing some kind of campaigning on her Twitter account. At her handle is at @smarizzi, Maurizi, and maybe as I do these streams at some point, I'll play a clip from our interview. I have a second part that I'll be posting soon about, and don't feel bad if you don't have money. I'm just throwing this out here. Every so often it's good to make sure people know what is worth donating to and what isn't. And we know that sometimes there are people who claim to need money, and they don't. I don't have the donation link handy, but if you go to her account at @smarizzi, she has been tweeting about it all throughout the last 24 hours. And she has a fundraising page where you could chip in a few dollars. So that's what I have. The hearing in the extradition case on January 4th will be a significant day. And so I'll probably be doing some streaming and coverage into that day. And then after, there will be plenty of coverage to do on it. I'm certain that I'll be making the media rounds, doing the shows that want to actually cover Julian Assange's case. Some of them will just ignore it potentially, but we will see. But I expect to talk to at least several people about the Assange case. I may even have the opportunity to co-organize another panel I don't know if you had a chance to catch it, but back in October 1st, I want to say it was, I organized a panel with Juan Passarelli, who's a filmmaker for WikiLeaks, and we had 8 journalists in total, including ourselves, who led conversations. And the journalists that we organized for this stream were all people who had credentials to cover the extradition trial, or were at least present every single day outside of the courthouse. Taylor Hudak didn't have a credential for inside, but was there every single day interviewing people outside the courthouse. So we talked to all of these journalists to get their expertise, because they're the ones who are reporters that had knowledge. And I wanted to include Stefania Marizzi, but she had a conflict. And then, Craig Murray was there. So we want to talk to the people who are there and present doing reporting. I really encourage you to steer clear of the punditry and promote the people who are actually doing journalism. I don't think there's much value if you're just going to say, the media doesn't care about Julian Assange. They're not covering this case. Why don't they cover the case? Well, let's talk about why the media is crap. We need people to understand what is at stake in this case by recognizing and understanding specifics from it. That can only happen if people take the time to dig into these filings, to report on the closing arguments, to look at the different aspects of the case, and to go beyond just this surface and very lazy analysis of, well, the media doesn't like Julian Assange. I can't tell you how bored I am with that, because that's every single interview that I do. Somebody wants to talk to me about why the media doesn't like Julian Assange. I mean, I think it's fairly well established at this point that the media just fucking despises Julian Assange. And we can move on to trying to inform the public so that they can campaign and create some pressure into shaming people into power, into, backing them into a corner so that perhaps he no longer is freezing in his cell at Belmarsh prison. Certainly Stella and his children would like that. And I think that's a better use of my time, rather than critiquing why people aren't supportive of Julian Assange in the media, because that's something that I think is pretty well known at this point, and they're not going to come around. So we have to find a way of making Julian Assange, ensuring his life doesn't end in a prison cell. We have to find a way to do that without their help. So that means supporting independent media, which you all do. So I thank you for doing that, because without independent media, there's a whole lot that we wouldn't know about the war on whistleblowers, and it's a whole lot that we wouldn't know about what the government is doing to attack journalists. And it's the kind of reporting that we need in order to challenge this crackdown on people through these kinds of unjust political prosecutions. So the last thing that I will say here is I wanted to reflect a bit on where we are as we end 2020. And I'll probably have more to say in some further streams. There may be some opportunity to do streams of this kind before the end of the year. I don't know if any of you are listeners to the show I co-host with Rania Kalik, Unauthorized Disclosure. If you're a subscriber or a patron, thank you. We have shows coming up, and I am going to do a show with her where we look back on the year, but specifically for the end of 2020, as we're in this moment where Donald Trump's administration is wrapping and we're looking ahead to the Biden administration. I'll use a phrase that I got from Roberto Lovato in talking with him. He's a journalist, a Salvadoran journalist who has a book out right now called Unforgetting. that looks at the violence, the interconnected violence between Salvador and the United States. And the words he used for Biden's administration is that we're going to have an intersectional empire. What does this intersectional empire mean for the future of whistleblowers? What does it mean for people within public disclosure organizations? And what does it mean for press freedom around the world? And to me, it means that we're going to see a whole lot continue that was started and ramped up under the Obama administration. We're going to see a return to some of those practices if they were not taken up or pursued by the Trump administration. But however, there's a remarkable continuity between Obama and Trump when it comes to the war on whistleblowers and the way in which agencies have relied and increased the use of insider threat programs to go after whistleblowers inside of these agencies to have a chilling effect on them. Donald Trump was very vengeful in his language about whistleblowers over the past 4 years. Obama didn't like leaks either. He didn't like people revealing and what was going on internally in his administration. He didn't have the rate of criminal prosecutions or investigations going on at the Justice Department that Obama did, but let's wait and see, because with Jeff Sessions, we had a squad organized, a counterintelligence squad at the FBI that was particularly responsible for making leak cases against people. Let's see how Biden makes use of that. We do not know who's going to be his attorney general. There are some names floating around that I'm not happy to be hearing as candidates for attorney general. But let's wait and let's see. But to me, it is very clear that Biden's policy around all of this is not going to be very different from President Obama. And there were plenty of reports written. There's a whole book by James Goodale, the former general counsel for the New York Times, who was involved in arguing the Pentagon Papers that compared Obama's record to President Richard Nixon, who was one of the few high-profile lawyers with a media history raising the alarm about what was going on with WikiLeaks. And as it turned out, he was right to be sounding the alarm, because Donald Trump was able to turn this into a case, or at least his Justice Department was. And we know the Democrats are opposed to WikiLeaks. We know their feelings. Republicans don't like WikiLeaks either. So we can probably expect the kind of campaign that has gone on against this media organization to press onward into 2021. The outcome of the extradition request, as far as how the judge rules, is going to determine a lot potentially, but it's on Biden to decide whether to drop this case, or it's on the attorney general that Biden appoints to decide whether to drop this case. And I just don't see a whole lot of likelihood of that happening. And we need reform. We need to, in many ways, I believe we need to abolish the Espionage Act. It's quite clear. We need to see an end to these prosecutions. Reality Winner should be free. Snowden should be able to come back home. Terry Albury shouldn't be serving any part of his sentence anymore. These people deserve to have their names cleared. Daniel Hale should not be facing a trial for providing documents on drones. And anyone who is still struggling from what has gone on as their lives were destroyed under the Espionage Act, they deserve to be made whole again. They deserve apologies from the U.S. government that unfortunately they're never going to ever receive. And that's how I feel. And the whistleblowers who are not from the national security apparatus, who have been willing to come forward throughout this year, I think that they need to be remembered. I think that they need to be told that what they're doing is courageous, just as much as we tell Edward Snowden and Reality Winner and other people that they're courageous. These people who are low-level workers at factories who have been going there, risking their lives, who have dealt with the spread of the virus, and who have struggled when there aren't protocols that involve proper masking and other things that should be done. They deserve to be held up and elevated. We don't know their names. There are people who spoke up as people who were nurses or doctors. There are people who have challenged the way in which slaughterhouses or meat packing plants have been abusing workers. We have seen people speak up about pollution in the environment and relaxed standards when it comes to environmental emissions and pollution in our waterways, our lakes, our rivers, toxins, the deregulation of chemicals, something that has to be dealt with immediately by the Biden administration. But of course, I don't know how much we can expect from Joe Biden if he's only concerned about not pissing off Republicans. And so let me just look at the comments that I have from you and conclude. Let me conclude this broadcast. I'm going to look here at all the wonderful people who are tuned in and having a conversation about what I'm saying. It's very lovely to follow. I thank you for your appreciation. So there was a question here for me. Kat asked, if the judge rules no, does Assange just stay at Belmarsh? What would happen after? So I'm not a lawyer, but to the best of my knowledge, he would then appeal the case. He would appeal the case to the next higher court, an appeals court, and then the appeals court could rule on the issue of bond. But the problem is that he has been denied the rights of asylum all throughout really the last 7 or 8 years. He's treated like a fugitive from justice, even though this case only existed back in 2018 was the first time he was ever indicted in secret. So fugitive from what? Well, I guess just fugitive from the clutches of the U.S. government that wanted to get their hands on him. That's what he's a fugitive from. Fugitive from the intelligence agents that wanted to capture him and pay him back for what they did in exposing them to scrutiny or something of that nature. So we have a comment here from JR. It seems domestic terrorism and surveillance is only going to get worse. They never stop their tactics, and unless more people stand up against them, I don't see any positive changes. 2021 needs to be a year of solidarity. People have to support each other much more. We need confrontation. People throw around things like general strike. We need campaigns that support people. There has to be action. I'm not an organizer, but I support people out there who are going to do this, and I'll be giving a platform to anyone who is willing to engage in this kind of action and resistance, because we're too complacent, and everything that people do in this country, as far as political elites go, they have it too cushy. They just get to coast, and what they offer people who are in need, it's not even table scraps. I'm not even sure if you can call it crumbs. You need a magnifying glass to see it. You need a magnifying glass to see what they're offering working people in order to help them survive, because it just barely appears on any kind of map when you compare it to other countries that offer and have offered much more to their people as they've survived one of the more grueling years. And it's impacted working people, but it's also had an effect on whistleblowers. It's affected Julian Assange, who has been in prison and has had his prison block become overridden with this virus. And then Reality Winner has been trying to get to home confinement so that she doesn't die in a prison cell. She sought compassionate release. And all these people who, are entirely delusional and believe that Donald Trump was some kind of deputy or agent of Putin haven't even stuck up for her. And now they're only doing it in order to score points against people who want Snowden and Assange to be freed from their exile and or prison. And they're not even genuine in their support about Reality Winner. They're very gross, in my opinion. Anyone who tells you to support Reality Winner over Snowden or Assange is not on our side. We support all people who have been unjustly prosecuted under the Espionage Act. There's no hedging. And for what they claim to believe Trump has done, Reality should have been freed immediately. Even though I have things that I can say about her case, and even though I don't entertain the Russiagate narrative, if what they say is what they believe, they have absolutely failed Reality, because she should be out of prison now. They should have done much more to create pressure in order to get her out of prison. If Democrats really believe what they believe, she should be one of the people who's freed in the first weeks, if not the first day of Biden. One of the first acts Joe Biden does would be to take his pen and pardon her and get her out. I think that says that a lot of what they're doing has always been a political ruse, partisanship, in order to just, get by without offering working people the things that they deserve. It's always been a distraction. And so, all right. Thank you all for tuning in to this broadcast. Thank you all for making a year of this show wonderful. I've enjoyed doing these broadcasts. It can be heavy content. It can be upsetting and infuriating, but it's always great to engage with you and know that there are people out there, whether it's just a handful on any given day, or whether it's a handful of people who look at the video and watch it after it's been archived and posted to our page and then shared with the newsletter, people who tune in that way. However you're getting this information, I've believed that we needed to go beyond the way that the establishment media covers whistleblower stories, because they usually only talk about whistleblowers that the Republicans want us to follow or that the Democrats want us to follow. And we miss the people who are against the system in its entirety, who just aren't on any particular side. They're on our side. They're not on the elite side. These are people who speak up and are powerless. And the fact is that they need advocates. They need people to know what they are doing, the risks they are taking. These are people who are blowing the whistle against empire. These are people who are blowing the whistle against superpower, or they are blowing the whistle against massive corporations that have huge influence over our lives. And they are trying to get government agencies to intervene and support them, and they can't get help. They can't get assistance. They are not recognized. They are marginalized. They are dismissed. They are not treated well. And if we do not talk about them, if we do not acknowledge that they exist and that they are out there, then they do not have any people to stick up for them. So we have to do this work. We have to pay attention. We have to see them for who they are. And I thank you for being there with me all year to give them the recognition that they deserve, to talk about these stories, to keep them on our radar. And so with that, I wish you all the best for 2021. And I'm gonna say goodbye in the context of this Dissenter Weekly show, but you'll probably be seeing me a couple more times on the Shadowproof YouTube before the year is over. But for the people who are primarily just watching for my whistleblower updates every week, I say good luck to you. Enjoy your holiday season. Be safe. And although I don't really like saying that, because then that might be putting pressure on you. I don't know. Maybe you are, maybe you aren't. So have a good holiday season, and I'll see you in 2021.